Hello, in this video I'm going to go over some MLA style tips that will be important for you to incorporate into your research projects. I'll talk about how to include research source information and in-text citations. We want to make sure that we're avoiding plagiarism by using parenthetical citations properly in our writing. There are 3 ways to include research information: direct quotes, paraphrase, and summarize. Direct quotes. These are quotations. They're verbatim words. Verbatim words are exact words with no changes or corrections. If you do need to make a change inside of your quotation, you will note the change in brackets. A common example is if you have a pronoun in your direct quote, such as he or she, and you want to identify specifically who the he or she is to make more sense for your quotation, then you would put the name inside of brackets. If you look at this example, you'll want to use single phrases or transitional words and phrases with your quotations. So this particular example is doing a few things here. According to Sally Johnson, the use of video games may be educational, 23. So we can see that in the single phrase, according to Sally Johnson, we have established who is the reference source for the direct quote. In that case, we wouldn't have to put the author's last name inside of our parenthetical citation. We just put the page number 23. Another thing to note is that you put the period outside of the parenthetical citation. So that is where the sentence then will end, or your information will end, and where your full stop should go. You also want to include a comma after your single phrase, and then use your quotation marks to show your verbatim words, the exact words that you're using from your reference source. When do you use direct quotes? You want to use quotations when paraphrasing isn't enough. So when you have to have the exact words out of the article, it's the best way to say what it is you need to say. Maybe there's a word or a phrase in there that you just can't restate another way. So you want to make sure you're including those exact words. Paraphrase. Paraphrases are the exact same idea as original work, but you're going to put that information in your own words. Paraphrases are introduced by single phrases and they end with a citation. You do not simply change the words. You don't go into the thesaurus and pick out synonyms in order to paraphrase. You're actually changing the sentence structure as well. So for example, if you look at the original words here, the United Nations estimates that 330,000 babies were newly infected in 2011, the most recent year for which there is data, and that more than 3 million children globally are living with HIV. So those are the original words out of the source, but you don't want to quote that information directly because you can say the same thing in a paraphrase, keeping the integrity of the ideas, keeping the facts and the statistics, but you still want to make sure that you reference your source. So if you look at the paraphrase, you can see that we have based on United Nations research. So we're setting up the information that we're going to be citing. Approximately 330,000 babies were infected with HIV in 2011, and more than 3 million children in the world have HIV. And then you have the reference site inside of parentheses, Pullock and McNeil, so that your reader, if needed, can go to your works cited page and pull out the reference information and be able to find where you got this information for your paraphrase. Again, the period goes on the outside of your parenthetical citation. When do you want to use paraphrase? You're going to use this when you need each piece of information in the original source, but you don't necessarily have to have it verbatim inside of your writing. So you'll probably use paraphrasing of ideas most commonly. The next thing that you might want to do is summarize. This is offering an overview of what the text means. So this is taking a bunch of information, a main idea and supporting details, and condensing it. Again, you're introducing the summary with single phrases and ending with citations. For example, if you look at the original words here, you can see that there are several lines of information given. So in an acceptable summary, you're just going to take the main idea and the supporting details and just sum it up. It's a way for you to concisely restate main ideas and supporting details within a longer work in a shorter way, often maybe in a sentence or two. Again, It ends with your parenthetical citation, which is the author's last name, Lester, and the pages where your summary is coming from, pages 46 to 47, and then your period goes at the end as well. So when do you use a summary? You'll want to use summaries when you don't need to convey every piece of information in the original source. So a direct quote is when you want to have those exact words. It's the best way to say whatever it is you're trying to convey. A paraphrase is when you need all of the information, but you don't necessarily need it stated exactly. The summary then is when you need the main points, but you don't need all of the information. So you're just summing up what you do need out of your reference source. You must give your sources credit. You want to avoid plagiarism at all costs. So to credit your sources, this is the basic format. You have the author's last name and the page number. Notice that there is no punctuation inside of a parenthetical citation. You don't put a comma between the author's last name and the page number. You don't put a period in there. There are no quotation marks in there. It's simply author's last name, page number, and the parentheses go outside of your citation. Electronic sources are a little bit different than the basic format, however, and sometimes writers are confused with how to craft parenthetical citations for electronic sources because of the absence of page numbers. But often, these sorts of entries do not require any sort of parenthetical citation at all. For electronic and internet sources, follow the following guidelines. Include in the text the first item that appears in the works cited entry that corresponds to the citation, like the author's name, the article name, the website name, or the file name. You do not need to give paragraph numbers or page numbers based on your web browser's print preview function. So you won't be using page numbers with an electronic source that you're using from the internet. Unless you must list the website name in the single phrase in order to get the reader to the appropriate entry, you do not include URLs in text. Only provide partial URLs, such as when the name of the site includes, for example, a domain name, like CNN.com or Forbes.com, as opposed to writing the whole thing out. Looking at these examples here, there are two major ways to cite electronic sources that you will be using. So these are probably the only two types of citations you're going to have for your research papers. First of all, if the reference information is given in the text, then you don't actually need a parenthetical reference at all. So if you look at the top example, Werner Herzog's Fitzcarraldo, stars Herzog's longtime film partner. And if you look through that information there, you could see that Herzog is mentioned in text as the writer was talking about the information provided from that resource. As a result, when you look at the bottom works cited reference, since Herzog is mentioned in the actual writing, it helps the reader find the citation on the works cited page. So no parenthetical citation is needed at all because you're not using a page number for an electronic source. So that's the difference between a print and electronic source reference, like we had looked at Johnson earlier, and we had to include the page number. Since you don't use page numbers on websites, you wouldn't actually have any kind of citation. You just keep going. And the same is true for the second one. If you mentioned your author or whatever the first thing is that shows up in your parenthetical reference in your works cited page, if it's the name of the article and that's the first thing that shows up on your works cited page and you mention that in your writing, then you just have the citation on the works cited page and no parenthetical citation within your document. The second way that you will cite your electronic sources is if you do not give reference information in the text. Then you do have to have a parenthetical reference. So for example, if you look at the top example for electronic sources, the online film critics stated that Fitzcarraldo has become notorious for its near failure and many obstacles. So there's a direct quote here. The article or what is being talked about in the reference reference site is mentioned, but that's not enough. Because there's no reference information for where this particular citation came from, you have to include the parenthetical citation. If you are using multiple pages on websites that have different titles, like in this top example here, then you would have to also include the article or the heading of the page that you're talking about in the reference as well, so that your reader can distinguish between which Taylor you're talking about and which article site source information you're talking about. And the second example is the same thing. The website is mentioned in text, but not the author. And because there is an author for the information, that would be included in the parenthetical citation as well. So, if your reference information, your author, is given inside of your text, no parenthetical citation. If your reference source is not noted in your text, then you do have to have a parenthetical reference, but you do not need a page number. This is an example of a works cited page, which is something we'll be talking about soon. Thanks for watching.